Hello, my name is Jennifer Krieger, and I would like to share with you some tips and techniques for cataloging sound and video recordings. The most common library materials that fall into these two categories are audiobooks and CDs that are sound recordings, and DVDs and Blu-rays that are video recordings. Many of you may have older VHS tapes in your libraries as well, but I doubt that you will be purchasing or having to catalog any of those. Let's take a look at a brief history of these materials. Sound recordings in the form of audiobooks have been available in a variety of formats since the 1930s. It was not until the 1980s that book publishers began marketing audiobooks. CD technology was developed in 1979, with the first album being released in 1982 by ABBA entitled The Visitors. For video recordings, the DVD was developed in 1995 and replaced the VHS tape as the standard for video in 1999. Shortly thereafter, the Blu-ray disc was developed in 2002 and became the industry standard in 2010, although you still see a lot of videos published in both the DVD and Blu-ray combination. For these media formats, to begin cataloging, you need to be able to find the chief source of information. With books, you are directed to look at the CIP, or Cataloging in Progress, information found on the back of the title page. For sound and video recordings, it's a bit different. For sound recordings, you should start with the label or labels on the recording, and if there happens to be two labels, such as the Disc 1 and Disc 2, you are to treat the two labels as the chief source. For video recordings, you should start with the title or credit frames, regardless of the location of these title or credit frames. Information at the end of the film is equal in status to that at the beginning of the film. Some other options for finding information may include labels affixed to the recording, the container or accompanying material issued with the recording, or an internal source such as the disc menu. Now let's take a look at how to create the MARC record for an audiobook sound recording. For this example, I'll be using the audiobook Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling. This audiobook was performed by Jim Dale and published by the Listening Library in 2005. It is the unabridged edition and comes on 17 compact discs. Let's start with the 100 title and the 245 Statement of Responsibility fields. The 100 field looks a lot like you would see for the traditional book listing the author J.K. Rowling. In the 245 field, you'll notice the title is there, but there's this new field, subfield H, which indicates that we have a sound recording for this audiobook and that it's not a book. The 245 field also includes information about the director and the producer of the audio CD. Next, let's take a look at the 250 edition and the 264 production, publication, distribution, manufacture, and copyright notice. In field 250, you will find information about the edition. For the purposes of an audiobook, record here whether the edition is abridged or unabridged, and our version happened to be the unabridged edition. The 264 field contains the statement relating to the publication, printing, distribution, issue, release, or production of the work. There are two indicators for this field. The first indicator is going to tell you the sequence of the statements, whether it is not applicable, whether it's an intervening sequence, or if it's the current and latest sequence. Notice we left it blank for not applicable for all of these. The second indicator will determine the function of the entity, whether it's a production, a publication, a distribution, a manufacture, or a copyright notice date. So ours is a publication date, and it was in New York, by the Listening Library in 2005, and the copyright then is 2005 as well. Now on to the 300 fields. Field 300 contains the physical description of the item described, including its extent, dimensions, and other physical details such as a description of an accompanying materials or the unit type and size. The first subfield is subfield A, which is the extent, which could be something like the number of pages if it were a book, or the volumes, cassettes, total playing time of the unit that we have. So we have a CD, which is 17 CDs, or sound discs in this case. Subfield B is other physical details, like physical characteristics such as illustrative matter, coloration, playing speed, groove characteristics, presence of some kind of sound, the number of channels, motion picture presentation, and other things. Ours is a digital version of this, so for audio we usually put digital or analog, and this happens to be a digital version of it. Subfield C includes the dimensions, expressed in centimeters, millimeters, or inches. Our CD is 4 3/4 inches, so we have that labeled there. The next three fields, 336, 337, and 338, are all taken directly from the RDA tables that we have. 336 contains the form of communication through which the work is expressed. Field 336 information enables the expression of more specific content types and content types from various lists. Ours happens to be a spoken word, and this comes from the RDA content table. If you wanted to see a full list of RDA content, you could go to their website, and here are some of the options for the RDA content, and we could scroll through and look at both the term name in this column and the codes that go in that column. Field 337 contains the media type which reflect the general type of intermediation device required to play, view, or run the resource that we have. For the media type here, this is an audio type. So it's sound, that's why it's got a subfield S here, and again this comes from the RDA media tables. And again we have a table that we could look at that lists all the media types, shows us the term in this column, and the code that goes in for the subfield B. The last one, field 338, contains the carrier type, which reflects the format of the storage medium and housing of a carrier in combination with the media type. It indicates the device that would be required to view, run, or play your media. So this is an audio disc or a sound disc, so that's why it's SD, and this again comes from the RDA carrier types. And there is a website for that as well that gives you some of your options that you have. So here are my audio options that I could choose. Was it a disc, was it a cassette, or was it a tape reel? If I keep scrolling down, I can see computer carriers and some of the different terms and codes for those. Then we have the microform carriers and the codes. We have microscopic carriers and codes, projected image carriers, stenographer carriers, unmediated carriers like cards, flip charts, and so on, video carriers, and then some other unspecified carriers. So you want to refer to these tables when you're trying to determine what the term and the code are that you're going to use for field 338. Now we're going to take a look at the notes fields, which are the 500 fields. There are several different type of 500 fields that you can use. Let's start with the 500. 500 is that catch-all for any note that does not fit into any of the other predefined 500 fields. It's a place for information that needs to be provided but is unclear where or how to enter that information, such as the chief source of the title information on electronic resources. You notice that this 500 field is definitely repeatable. So what I've done for this one is labeled it as an audiobook that's on a compact disc and let them know that the title came from the container. I also let them know that this is a sequel to the book Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix in my 500 field. The next type of 500 field I used was actually a 508. A 508 is a listing of credits for persons or organizations other than the members of the cast who have participated in the creation and or production of the work. That introductory term of credits is usually generated as the display content for this. So I've got listed here the producer and the director. Next you see I have a 511, which is another type of note field. It is used for information about participants, players, narrators, presenters, or performers. This one you use a 0 for that first indicator if there is no display constant to go with it. Otherwise, if you put a 1 here, that means that the display constant is cast. In other words, you're listing the cast of the performance. In this case, we put a 0 because we want it to be the narrator, which is he was performed by Jim Dale. The last one I'm using here as a note field is field 520. 520 is for unformatted information that describes the scope and general contents of the materials. It could be for a summary or an abstract, an annotation or review, or only a phrase describing the material. The level of detail appropriate in a summary may depend varying upon the audience or the product that you're doing. So we have here that Harry searches for the full and complex story of the boy who became Lord Voldemort and thereby finds that what may be his only vulnerability, as the summary of what this book is about. We are all familiar with subject heading fields that go in those 600 fields. So here I have listed some of the different subject heading fields that I've created that go along with this audiobook. You notice that I used a 650 and labeled it as an audiobook that's also in the form of a juvenile fiction. I used a 650 to identify Harry Potter as the fictitious character, to identify the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I also labeled wizards and magic, and each time I labeled it as juvenile fiction. We used a 651, which is a location subfield or a geographic subfield, to indicate that it took place in England, and I used a 655, which is a genre or form subfield, or field, to identify that this is in the form of a compact disc. You want to make sure that you provide adequate access through the assignment of appropriate subject headings for your items. Make sure that you include a 650 field with the subject heading of audiobooks in it so that we can label it as an audiobook. Lastly, we're going to create the 700 fields for the added entry points. You want to be sure to add enough tracing fields for the people, the corporations, or the geographic locations associated with your item other than that you noted in maybe that 100 field, which has the author in it. In this example, I have 4 700 fields. One of them is actually a 710 field. The 700 is for people, and so I have Jim Dale, who is the narrator, Dale Rapkin, who is the director, and Orly Moskowitz, who is the producer. The 710 field is for corporations, and we happen to be using the Listening Library, which was the company that produced this audiobook. Now let's try a music CD. For this example, I will use the self-titled album by Wynton Marsalis. This album was produced by Herbie Hancock with executive producer George Butler. It was recorded in New York by CBS Studios. For this music CD, you'll notice that in the 100 field, which is typically our title statement, that we put in Wynton Marsalis. Instead of the author, we put the artist that produced this, so we have his information in that 100. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in the 245, again, you'll notice this subfield H, which indicates that we have a sound recording. It's not an audio book this time, but it is a music CD, which is still a sound recording. In the 300 fields, you'll notice that this is very similar to the ones that we used for our audio book. You notice that the first 300, which is our physical description, we have one sound disc that is a digital disc that is 4 3/4 inches in dimensions. You'll notice in the 336 that instead of it saying spoken word, it now says that this is performed music, and we have a different code for that came from that RDA content table. Otherwise, the audio is still here, that it's a sound, and that it is an audio disc that would need a sound device to be able to be played. Now let's take a look at some of the notes that we've created for this music CD. In a 500, you notice that I put that it's a compact disc, and that it is also jazz ensembles, and that some program notes by Stanley Crouch were included in that container. Remember the 505. What the 505 is for, we didn't see this in our audiobook, it's used for the titles of separate works that are included, or parts of that are included in that table of contents. So we've got indicated here the different songs along with the composer of those songs for each of the songs that was on that musical CD. Then you see another 508, which we had in our audiobook as well. Remember, this is listing the credits, so here we list the executive producer George Butler and the producer Herbie Hancock. Now we're taking a look at our subject access fields in the 600s. In the 600, since it's a person by surname, we've got Wynton Marsalis. And then we have in the 650 that this is a jazz composition. And then we have that in the 655 that we have the format or genre of compact discs. Lastly, let's take a look at those 700 fields, or those added entry points. Here we have listed some of the people that were involved in producing this album, such as George Butler, who was the producer, Ron Carter, the composer, Herbie Hancock, a producer, Anthony Newley, who was a composer, and Tony Williams, who was also a composer on this album. Now that we've done a sound recording, let's look at video recordings, and let's examine how to catalog a DVD in MARC. For this example, I am using the DVD Spaced Invaders, which was released by Touchstone Pictures. It was produced by Luigi Ciangolani, directed by Patrick Reed Johnson, with music composed by David Russo. The main characters in the movie were voiced by Douglas Barr, Royal Dano, and Ariana Richards. For video recordings, we're going to start with the 245, and you're going to notice that again we have a subfield H, but this time instead of saying sound recording, it says video recording here. And in our subfield C, we have listed those involved. Touchstone Pictures presents in association with Silver Screen Partners, Smart Egg Pictures, Luigi Cinganolani production. Screenplay by Patrick Reed Johnson and Scott Lawrence Alexander. Produced by Luigi Cingolani. Directed by Patrick Reed Johnson. Okay, the other thing in the 264, we again have the production information that tells us it was in Burbank, California. Buena Vista Home Entertainment Incorporated. And we've got a question mark here because we're not sure the year is exactly 2002 for the release date from this production. Now we're taking a look at those 300 fields, and it's within these 300 fields that you can really specify that the item you're cataloging is a video. Okay, so in the 300, the physical description, again, we have one DVD video that is 100 minutes in length. In subfield B, we describe that it has sound and that it's in color, and then the size of the disc is 4 3/4 inches. Now these 336, 337, and 338 should look familiar to you. They are content, media, and carrier. One thing you'll notice is we have something different here for the content, and by using those tables, we found that this is a two-dimensional moving image, or a movie. The media, it's video, and the carrier, it comes on a video disc. I also have two new fields here, the 346 and the 347, which allow me to give some more information about the video. We can give the fact that the video is a laser optical disc, that it used the NTSC standards for video, that it is a video file that came on a DVD video. Here are my notes that go along with this DVD. You'll notice in my 500, my catch-all, I've got that this is a widescreen enhanced for 12 by 19 televisions. I have a 508. Remember, this is for listing some of the credits of people other than the actors involved. So this was music composed and conducted by David Russo. I have a 511, which is listing the cast. So that's why there's a 1 in that first subfield. It includes Douglas Barr, Royal Dano, and Ariana Richards. And then I have a 520, which, remember, that's our summary field. So it gives us a summary of the movie, which says comedy about 5 Martians who crash landed in a small Midwestern town where they are mistaken for Halloween trick-or-treaters. Here are our subject access fields for this DVD. So you notice I have several 650 subfields which have the topics such as Martians, Midwest. I also have comedy films, but I added a geographic subfield here for that one of United States. And then at the bottom I have a 655, which again is our genre or form, and I labeled that as a DVD video disc. Lastly, we're looking at our 700 or added entry points for this record. You'll see that I have several people that I have added to this one, which include the actors, the screenwriters, the producers. And then I have some 710s, which are the corporations involved, and I list Touchstone Pictures as the presenter, Silver Screen Partners as the production company, and Smart Egg Pictures as also the production company for this DVD. One last example to do, and I'm sure by now you're starting to catch on and see some of the familiar fields and some of this familiar coding that gets done for creating those MARC records. For our last example, we're going to do a Blu-ray. The Blu-ray is for the movie Magnificent Doll by Hallmark Productions. It is a Jack H. Skirball and Bruce Manning presenters, Frank Borzage as the director, and it's starring David Niven, Ginger Rogers, and Burgess Meredith. Again, we'll start with our 245 and 264 fields. 245 is that title statement. So we have the title Magnificent Doll. We have that subfield H again, which it is a video recording. And we have that subfield C, which lists all of the people responsible for that video recording. Then our 264 gives us the information that it was produced in Chicago, Illinois by Olive Films in 2014, which is the copyright date as well. So that's why we have the second 264 down here. Here are 300 fields which give us some information about the physical description, content type, media type, carrier type, video characteristics, and digital file characteristics. These should look very similar to our DVD that we did. You'll notice in the 300, the physical description, though, we changed to say one Blu-ray instead of DVD disc. The subfield B, we have that it has sound, but it is in black and white. Still a two-dimensional moving image. The one thing you'll notice also is down at the bottom, the digital file characteristics. It is a video file, but it is on Blu-ray this time for that video file characteristics. Now we're taking a look at those notes fields that I have created for this Blu-ray. Again, we've used a couple 500s, which are catch-alls, to let them know that it was originally produced in the United States as a motion picture in 1946, and also that it's in full screen. 508, remember, are our credits for people other than the actors, which lists the director, photography, the music editor, the production company, are all listed there. Then we have a 511, which is giving our cast credits. That's why we have a 1 again in our subfield of David Niven, Ginger Rogers, and Burgess Meredith. And our 520, which is our summary statement of the video, which tells us one woman's romantic entanglements have historic repercussions. Dorothea Dolly Payne is torn between her affection for Aaron Burr, vice president under Thomas Jefferson and something of a scoundrel, and James Madison, a political idealist soon to be known as the father of the Constitution. In our 600 fields, which are our subject headings or subject access fields, you will see that I have a couple 600s which are for people. By surname, we have James Madison and Aaron Burr. I also listed some subjects, 650 are topical subjects of first ladies, feature films, and historical films, all of which are drama. To the historical film, I added a geographic subfield to indicate that it was from the United States. And then we have a 655, which is again for genre or form, and where I list Blu-ray disc. Lastly, we're going to look at the 700 fields, which are those added entry points. We've listed many of the people involved with a 700 field and given their level of involvement and what they did with the film. We have a 710. Remember, those 710s are for those corporations, and we have one for Hallmark Productions, which was the production company, and then Olive Films, which was the publisher of the actual Blu-rays that we created. I hope that through these examples you now have a better understanding of how to catalog sound and video recordings.